So I don't think I've been on Spokeo checking things out, but I want to tell a story that I suspect, I at least hope will resonate with many of you. How many of you have an iPhone? More than put up their hands with Spokeo. So I bought an iPhone very early on, and I went to activate it. And unlike my previous cell phone, I could only do it online because of the wonderful ways in which things were set up. And on the first page, it asked for my social security number. How many of you know whether that's something that they're actually allowed to ask for? They're not. However, you can't get to the next page unless you provide it. So everybody who held up their phone or their hand gave their social security number. It went through, my account was activated, and the next day I was about to leave for Europe, and I needed to have international calling. That wasn't part of the standard package, and I had to call in to activate that. I got online with an interviewer who could have been anywhere in the world, and the first question was, have you ever lived at any of the following addresses? And she rattled off 9 addresses in Ohio. And my answer was, no. She said, if you don't tell the truth, we won't be able to activate international calling. I said, I did tell the truth. I have never lived in Ohio. You've obviously got information on a linked set of records that have linked my files erroneously to someone else's. Can I speak to your supervisor? And this conversation went on for an hour, and there is no way to rectify the problem I identified. Fortunately, whoever's data is linked to mine in this database has a good credit rating. And so 4 months later, I was able to activate international calling because I had been a customer online. But there is no way to know which data warehouse that linkage came from and how those data are being used for other purposes. And don't think that this is a trivial matter, because the government is buying those databases from data warehousers and using them in the war on terrorism. And therefore, the next time one of you gets stopped in an airport because your data have been put on one of the special lists, it may be because of an erroneous link. And this is a problem, actually, several of us highlighted in a report called, I happen to bring it with, anticipating this question, Protecting Individual Privacy in the Struggle Against Terrorists. And it really is a big-time policy issue for the government. Not so much that they shouldn't be gathering the data, but that they need to provide mechanisms to assure that the data are correct and that your rights are protected.
I completely agree. The problem of inaccurate personal data is probably as large as the problem of accurate and too sensitive and too publicly available personal data. And it's not just a database issue, it's also an economic issue in that often the parties responsible for these mistakes, such as doing mixed records with SSN, mixing yours with somebody else, they don't pay the cost for those mistakes. So you have this disassociation between the party making their error and who will then pay the price. In fact, Spokeo, the example we started from, although he did have accurate and creepy information about me, he also have very inaccurate information. So that's probably most likely the case for most of us, which brings up, again, the economic and legal issue. What can you do about websites that tell everybody else something about you which may not even be correct? Now, switching to a related but different question from the audience, let's talk about information which is correct because you have revealed yourself. And this is a fun question. It's about, there is an element of policy and politics here. How do you think the political campaigns and executive staffing will change once the Facebook generation starts running for office? Who wants to take this one? The skeleton in the Facebook profile, right? Will it be the case that, I don't know, 10 years from now, everybody will have their skeleton in their Facebook profile, everybody has uploaded a silly photo, and everybody has said something really stupid on Facebook, and therefore we become all more congenial and open-minded because everybody does it, so I did it, you did it, and nobody will care when you run for Supreme Court Justice or President of the United States?
Well, I'm wondering if this is going to be like the new version of I didn't inhale. I didn't inhale. I'm imagining what it would. I didn't tweet, or I didn't post that status message. I mean, this is an issue that I've actually talked about in the social web class that my colleague and I teach, which is there's a big shift in people's profiles right before they graduate and before they go to their first job, primarily for the same reason, because they're viciously trying to scrub all the photos and their status messages and whatnot because they're trying to have the impression management. They're trying to have a professional kind of look and feel to their webpage. In fact, I mean, I'll even admit this. I tell my friends not to post on my Facebook page because I want to look like a professor to all of you guys. And this is sort of the same thing. Though I think it's a really interesting question. What is it going to look like in 10 or 20 years? It may be the fact that Facebook will just archive all this and just make it really hard to find. To some extent, digging up really old Facebook posts is not something that a lot of people do. So it might actually become a norm that a lot of people don't do. But I suspect that what's going to happen is there's going to be some embarrassing things and people are just going to find some ways around it. Or it might also become a cause for celebrity too. I mean, how many people got famous because of stupid videos? How many people are well known because of some viral video that's went online? I'm even thinking Paris Hilton got famous for a sex video. So it actually might become, embarrassingly, a cause for a celebrity.
Maybe on top of all the other revenues they make from games and advertising, Facebook will become the highest entity paid for political campaigning and consultancy, in the sense that they would have so much dirt on everyone that there could be this hidden market to bring up or keep hidden your secret information that you took away from your profile 5 years ago, but they still have. Lorrie, you.
Yeah, so I mostly agree with what Jason said there. I think that we're going to find that there's some types of dirt that gets dug up that people become very accepting of, and they say, yeah, everybody's done that, and it no longer is an issue. And then there'll be some types of things that I think people will say, no, that really is crossing the line. And so I think there will be an incentives among the muckrakers to find those gems, hidden in there. And so it may shift the debate. We may spend a lot of time talking about past details of people's personal lives that are not currently being discussed in the campaigns. I expect we'll have a period where it's kind of distracting, where we talk about a lot of these things that may not really be relevant, and until we sort out which are the ones that people care about and which ones don't, and then once there's kind of a norm as to what people care about, then I think a lot of these things will go away, people won't worry about them, and they'll only bring to light the really severe things. I also think that there is an emerging market for brand management, and this is even personal brand management, of companies that will help you go and find all the stuff you might not like about yourself on the internet and try to get rid of it. And while there's some things that you can never completely obliterate, they can make it a lot harder for people to dig it up later. And so I think that's going to become a big industry.
And that's again brings up the economic issue of the lowering or increasing the search cost of information you want or you don't want available. And the next question from the audience is related to economics. The point here is a company like Google and Facebook, of course, have a clear economic incentive in gathering more and more data and managing and selling it. Their economic power allows them to become very powerful players in Washington. And Facebook, for instance, a few years ago didn't even have any lobbyists, and now I believe they have more office of at least 15 people in DC, and they started lobbying also at the European Union. So what do they lobby for? Of course, to have a privacy legislation not too restrictive or even no privacy legislation. So aside from the theoretical debate between economists and law scholars of whether ever privacy legislation can work, aside from the theoretical debate, the practical issue here is, with this superpower lobbying so much the Congress for in the area of privacy legislation, do you think that protecting privacy through laws in the United States has any chance?
No. I think it's a very complex game. I've actually worked for government for a few years. I was actually at the European Commission when the European Data Protection Directive was passed, and I was actually involved in organizing some of the events that led to that. And so it's interesting to see how things, happen in the kitchen, if you want. There's, for instance, I was at an event last week called the Digital Privacy Forum, where a number of people were very optimistic about the outlook, for instance, for laws such as do not track. They were saying 2011 is the year for privacy. I think one has to, it's great to be optimistic, and it'd be great to see some more legislation in this area. I think we all realize that the US is certainly different from, let's say, a number of other countries around the world, Europe, for instance, being probably a good example of what happens in many other places. For instance, it's also important to understand that legislation by itself will never really be able to keep up with technology. By default, legislation will always be one step behind at least, and that beyond legislation we're going to need technologies ultimately. I think that a number of the problems that we're talking about will only be resolved if there's a combination of legislations and technologies that come together. The legislative side will have to be very, very light. To think that the big companies like Google and Facebook are necessarily the ones that are going to lobby the most strongly against these initiatives is not necessarily always the right assumption. I mean, they certainly have some interest that they need to protect, but in many ways, the danger with legislation that's too heavy is that you might stifle innovation. And so you might essentially prevent the next Facebook also from coming out. It's very hard to anticipate all the possible scenarios that people might come up with. And that's why it's so difficult to obviously come up with good legislation, regulation in this space.